Now, according to the scientific journals, if you've been diagnosed with fibromyalgia, there's a good chance that it could be something else. And if it is, that something else may be treatable. So, let's look at what they've found. Now, you're probably aware that the diagnosis of fibromyalgia means that you have the symptoms, but the doctors haven't been able to find the cause. Now, it's the doctor's way of saying, I know nothing, but it's sounding like they do. And the drug companies have brainwashed them that you need to be on symptom-relieving drugs for the rest of your life. Now, as I said, there's a good chance that it could be something else. Now, according to a study published in the Journal of Anesthesia and Pain Medicine, 94% of people diagnosed with fibromyalgia had another medical condition that wasn't diagnosed. Now, I'll leave this summary for a few seconds in case you want to pause and read it. Now, in another study of patients referred to a specialist rheumatology clinic, they found that 66% had something else. Now, let me share with you my experiences as a chiropractor. Now, I had a lot of patients who've been diagnosed with fibromyalgia come in, and most of the time their symptoms were caused by extensive musculoskeletal problems, including things we call trigger points. Now, they're those tender lumps in your muscles that massage therapists find and shoot pain when you're pressing them. Now, if you remember, the diagnosis of fibromyalgia means that you have the symptoms, but the doctors can't find anything wrong. Any half-competent therapist could find those lumps and pressing them to cause pain, but doctors are not trained to look for them, and they don't show up on any scans or laboratory tests. Now, put simply, all the information doctors receive is heavily influenced by the drug companies, and they'd much rather trigger points weren't found than you took symptom-relieving drugs instead. Now, as an example, researchers have found that trigger points are the major cause of shoulder pain, and treating them gives excellent results. However, the journals the doctors read rarely mention them. Now, I'll link more info on that. Now, those patients I saw had a simple cause for their widespread pain, but the doctors couldn't find it, so they were diagnosed as having fibromyalgia. However, it gets a bit more complicated. Now, there's a lot of patients who have conditions like trigger points or some other medical problem, but have symptoms way worse than you'd expect. So, what's going on there? Well, a bunch of scientists have worked that one out. Now, what they found is if your nervous system is bombarded by something over a long period of time, it can become sensitized. Now, basically, it becomes like a big amplifier. Any small amount of pain gets ramped up to become major, and because the nervous system controls your body, if it starts putting out abnormal signals, you can get all sorts of seemingly unrelated symptoms. So, in summary, this is what happens. Now, you have something cause only small or moderate amounts of pain for years or even decades, then your nervous system becomes sensitized and all hell breaks loose. Now, the other important thing that can add to the bombardment of your nervous system is emotional stress. Now, prolonged emotional stress can cause sensitization, but it's probably more important that having fibromyalgia can be highly stressful, so once your nervous system is sensitized, the emotional stress just adds to the problem. Now, another thing I need to mention is a lot of people say they got fibromyalgia after some specific incident, such as a virus, trauma, or even an injection. Human nervous systems are pretty resilient, so what's likely happening is it was already under stress, then a specific thing pushed it over the edge. Now, once it's sensitized and you've got the underlying stress plus any emotional stress, that's usually more than enough to maintain the sensitization. So, understanding that, what do we do about it? Well, the obvious thing is that a lot of fibromyalgia is preventable. Now, we know that long-term pain and other abnormal stresses, whether it's trigger points, a medical condition, or even severe emotional stress, can sensitize your nervous system. Now, if you have any of those, get them taken care of properly. Now, don't do the typical thing of taking drugs to mask the problem. But what if you've already had fibromyalgia? Now, the good news is that science have found that if you remove whatever's sensitizing your nervous system will settle down, and the fibromyalgia symptoms will go. Now, as I said before, a lot of things can cause sensitization. Now, it can be a medical condition, maybe an arthritic pain, or even the emotional stress of being in an abusive relationship. However, scientists have found the biggest cause by far is those trigger points I've mentioned. Now, why is that? Now I'll link more detailed info, but they're arguably the most common cause of musculoskeletal pain syndrome, such as back, neck and shoulder pain. The drug companies have trained doctors not to look for them and give you drugs instead. And if they're identified, therapies like massage, needling and lasers used to just temporarily relieve the pain but leave the problem. Now, scientists have found that compared with non-sufferers, fibromyalgia sufferers are riddled with trigger points. Now, also, as a bit of irony, the tender spots that doctors are told to find to diagnose fibromyalgia are trigger points. Now, what the scientists have done is inject those trigger points with anaesthetic to stop them bombarding the nervous system with pain. And as I said before, when the nervous system stops being bombarded, it settles down and the fibromyalgia symptoms go. Now, as you probably realise though, anaesthetics wear off and it wouldn't be practical to get your trigger points injected each day. But it does demonstrate two important principles. Now the first is that while there are many causes of sensitisation, trigger points are the main ones. And second is that if you remove the cause, fibromyalgia can settle down. Now, because the trials usually just test one thing, all they did was trigger points, but in the real world situation, you'd be looking at trigger points plus anything else that could be contributing. Now, the other issue, of course, is that anaesthetics are temporary. Now, to stop the trigger points bombarding a nervous system, you'll need to get rid of them. But as I mentioned before, typical courses of trigger point therapy usually just temporarily relieve the pain but leave the trigger point. Now, with fibromyalgia, it's actually even harder. Now, the trigger points will have been there for a long time, becoming well entrenched, and have developed secondary musculoskeletal issues. Now, also, with the sensitisation, you may not be able to tolerate therapy as well. Now, because of this, I highly recommend you get some help from a university qualified professional who deals with this sort of thing, such as a chiro, osteo or physio. Now, the key thing will be that to get rid of the trigger points properly, you'll need to keep going with any trigger point therapy for long after any pain is gone, now, which would be prohibitively expensive if done professionally. Now, because of this, I'll link a video on how to do very effective home trigger point therapy. Now, as a professional myself, some of my time can be spent doing trigger point therapies on the muscles, and other time would be doing things like diagnosing, giving advice and taking care of other things. Now, if you have fibromyalgia, you'll need bucket laser therapy. Now, you want to be doing most of that yourself and having someone like me just concentrating on the diagnosis, advice and managing other things. Now, you'll need to work with your professional for that one. And look, hopefully this has been a big help, and thank you very, very much for watching. It has been most appreciated.